Hello everybody, it is Micah here, and today I want to take a moment to talk to you about New World, the MMO that was released just last week from Amazon Studios. Now, I'm sure you've heard a lot about this game already. It's been in development for quite a long time, and sites like PC Gamer have frankly been going a little bit overboard with their coverage, especially when you compare it to their coverage of other games at release. Almost like a multi-billion-dollar company who's trying to get into the gaming market was doing what multi-billion-dollar companies do when they begin a new enterprise. But you're not going to get those shenanigans here because frankly, I'm just not large enough of a channel for them to care about me. So it allows me to be a little bit more honest when I discuss these sort of things. I'm also only about 40 to 50 hours in, and I've not leveled up too incredibly high, but this is just a first impressions video, so I'm not really going to be getting into a lot of the meat or a lot of what the game has to offer at high levels. I promise you though, if I actually make it into the higher levels, I'm going to post another video covering what I have found. But that being said, let's go ahead and let's dive right on into New World and take a look at what to expect if you start a new game. And where better to begin than the visuals, which is one of those things this game does really well. I mean, it's beautiful. The world is just alive with vegetation stretching out as far as your draw distance will allow, and I don't even have this game at max specs, because even at high settings with my 1440p monitor, it causes my graphics card to be a little bit noisier than I'm used to. I run almost all other games on the highest settings possible with ease, but this one will definitely put my graphics card to work. Now I'm going to be really interested to see what this game will look like when I'm finally able to snag that 3080 Ti that I'm after, because even at mid-range settings, this game is gorgeous. Cities are compact and dense, they really have a feeling of being lived in. Now, this of course may disappear when the game ages a bit and there's fewer players around, because like in most games, NPCs are still mostly stationary. But cities are also littered with houses that are available for purchase, so that just may keep them a little bit more populated. And that's always a plus, especially since the homes are instanced. But frankly, if you're making an MMO and you're not going the instanced housing route at this point, you're making a bad choice, because it's definitely going to be a problem later. The wilderness is just that. It's wild, which creates some stunning visuals. Wooded areas are dense with vegetation, ruins are scattered around, and nearly every tree, plant, and boulder you encounter are harvestable. However, the sheer density of this flora around the world is also a disadvantage, because it does tend to hide quite a few enemies, and this causes a lot more surprise aggro and surprise links from random mobs. It also makes hunt quests, which are plentiful, a little bit more of a pain in the backside until you get your skinning and tracking skill high enough to have the various fauna trackable in your directional bar. It ups the difficulty of avoiding encounters and hunting, but not in an interesting way. Hiding mobs is cheap in my opinion, and it tends to make everything a little bit more frustrating than anything else. The music and sound effects I've heard so far are okay, but do nothing to really drum up any emotional response or even really set a mood. It's simply mostly background noise that will just tell you if you're being attacked. But all I've heard really is the overworld and basic battle music, so that isn't that abnormal, just a bit of a bummer. I'm also coming off Final Fantasy XIV, which is my main MMO, and that game is known for the brilliance of their music. I mean, Soken is amazing, and it's going to be hard to top him. So I have a bias. There's also a few things that have bothered me about this game when it comes to the overworld at large. And the first of these is that there doesn't seem to be a weather system. It's simply a sunny day or a clear night. There's no rain, there's no wind, there's no thunder, there's no weather whatsoever. I mean, did they just forget to add weather? Or is there another reason? I will admit, I didn't really follow the development of this game too closely, and I'm not sure if they tried to explain it via lore or something, but this is a really strange thing not to add, and it takes a lot away from the world. There's also no swimming. You just slowly walk across the bottom of a river until you drown. And even crossing a body of water that's more than knee deep will reduce your movement speed significantly, but it will not reduce the movement speed of any enemies. So if you're trying to escape a Link or some aggro because you're about to die, stay out of water, otherwise you're gonna get caught. I've also gotten stuck in the world a lot. Like, I've gotten stuck in this world more than I have in any other world in any other game. I've clipped through stones as I dodge. I've fallen into crevices as I explore the world. I mean, there is an option on the main menu to get you unstuck, but the sheer amount of times I've already been stuck, and also the things I see around, such as gathering nodes that are just half buried in other things in the world, it just makes me feel like the map was automatically generated, and quality control was really not much of a concern. The user interface doesn't really interfere too much. They did a really good job at keeping it functional, yet minimal. The chat box is rather large and it takes up more room than anything, much more room than it should, quite frankly, in my opinion, but everything else is set off to the side so you can get the information you need at a glance, except for map information because they decided that they were not going to add a minimap. Inventory is weight-based, which is good for survival games, but generally make inventory management more complicated in games like this one, especially for ranged and heavy armor users. You do have ways to increase your carry weight via bags, and there is storage, but weight-based inventories are typically a drag, and in this game, when gathering is an essential part, ammo is a thing, most healing is done with potions, and even starter gear tends to be a little bit heavier, it definitely is a drag. And I've seen bags that more than double your inventory space, so hopefully this won't be an issue in late game, and this is just an early game issue, but yeah, not a big fan. One choice that they made, which is becoming more and more common, is to not add classes. Instead, your role is going to depend on which weapon you're wielding, and those weapons are mostly what you would expect for specific roles, like you have a sword and board tank or a staff wielding healer. And while this seems like it gives you a choice and a more freestyle way of playing, it's actually an illusion of choice, since you cannot be a fire staff wielder or an archer and also be a healer or a tank. You are simply a damage dealer. This illusion of choice is even doubled down on with the ability to place your stats under certain attributes, like strength or dexterity. But if you're playing a ranged class, a mage class, a melee class, whatever, you need to place your stats into very specific attributes. So there's honestly not even a real need to have this system at all. All it really does is restrict your choices to a very specific build unless you want to pay for a respec. Or you are a multi-billion-dollar corporation who's trying to fool your players into thinking they actually have a choice on how to build their character for marketing purposes when you're not actually giving them any choices whatsoever. With the system the way it is, there's no real reason not to have classes other than to give that aforementioned illusion of choice and say, hey, look, we're doing something new and different when they're not at all. To make some quick cash on respecs and to not have to do any development on actual classes. Because you don't need class lore if you don't got no classes. One of the core ways you're going to be earning experience is by questing, and the questing here is the same as it is in almost every other MMO. After you join a faction, or you arrive in a city which will act as a quest hub, the game is going to throw a lot of quests at you all at once. Now, a few of these quests come with NPC dialogue, but at the same time, that dialogue does not give you much lore or really have anything interesting to say, if they have anything to say at all. I've yet to find a real narrative or any sort of real story in this game. Now, the voice acting is reasonably good, but since they don't really have anything important to say, I found that I have no real need to listen to them, and I instead will usually just mute my sound and read the text because that is much faster. The way they seem to want to interject lore into this world is mostly by books and letters they have scattered around the world. But if we've learned anything from Fallout 76, that is not a good way to force lore into your game. There's also not much of a variety in quest objectives either. Mostly they're just your standard fetch quests, kill quests, or a little bit of both, asking you to hunt down and skin 3 wolves or bison. Some will ask you to bring back gathered items like wood or fish, or crafted items like food and armor. Again, there's nothing new, there's nothing interesting here. And like I said, a lot of the quests give you no information or lore at all. So you just take them off of a board and then you go kill 3 of these or gather 20 of that for, I don't know, reasons. Combat was very disappointing to me at first, and I had nothing good to say about it. And frankly, I'm still on the fence. It really feels like whoever came up with the battle system for this game played The Elder Scrolls Online for a few days and decided the battle system for that MMO, which is also one of the most criticized things about that game, was just way too complicated. So they had to dumb it down as hard as they possibly could. Attacking consists of light and heavy attacks, where you tap your mouse button once for a light attack and hold it down for a heavy attack, just like we've seen in other games. Where New World differs is that one button is the primary way combat is going to play out, almost like a shooter rather than an RPG or an MMO. You are able to unlock up to 3 other attacks or heals that you can weave in between these basic attacks, but with only 3 other abilities, which are almost all on fairly lengthy cooldowns, using these abilities also feels unnatural, it feels clunky, especially if they have a ground target, which just does not work well by any means. More often than not, if I'm using like my flame staff and I want to use the ability Flame Pillar, the ground target does not even appear, it just fires off at my feet. And when you do get that target to appear, it just doesn't want to cooperate most of the time. There's just no real flow to combat, and the enemy AI is incredibly simple. So you're going to spend more of your time tapping one single button to attack, and then maybe another to dodge, which will prevent you from attacking and just extending the length of the battles anyway. On the flip side, this does mean that dodging is a little bit more useful in this game compared to others. If I miss a dodge, enemies are going to hit me fairly hard. Even light attacks would land not once, but sometimes 3 to 5 times, making them do the same amount of damage, or sometimes more, than a heavy attack. If you wield a life staff, you are able to heal yourself at an okay speed, but the global cooldown for your heals is also on a quite long timer, meaning you cannot spam heal yourself when things take a turn. If you are not on top of dodging, you can easily have your health whittled down to under 50% from just one mob. And you don't replenish HP once you lose aggro, meaning you're going to burn through your heal potions fairly quickly. If you are a ranged player, you're in for a really bad time in New World, because during my time testing the bow and the fire staff, my damage was significantly lower than when using a hammer, hand axe, or sword. Not to mention the targeting feels a bit wonky, and also one of the reasons I think my damage was so low. There were encounters I could barely survive when I was using a fire staff that were absolutely no problem when I was using a hand axe. All enemies also have gap closers and do not allow you to use the environment to your advantage, so you're always going to be in melee range, making aiming that much more difficult. If they can't reach you, an enemy is simply going to de-aggro, and if you try to use something like a fence to create an advantage, they seem to gain a speed boost and just run around it. If you're using a bow, for instance, you need to dodge, aim, and fire all at the same time, which takes a fair amount of skill and can be a bit frustrating until you get that skill. They also added a ranger tax. Now, for those of you not in the know, a ranger tax basically just means they added ammunition, something most games no longer do because it causes ranged jobs to be at an unfair disadvantage to all other classes. Not only do you need to carry around a stock of arrows or bullets at all times, but they also eat up your precious weight-based inventory. 50 iron arrows is about 5 pounds, and you can burn through 50 arrows extremely quickly. So having 20 or more pounds of your inventory eaten up just on arrows is not that uncommon. Then if you run out, you're just out of luck and you cannot attack at all until you either find a different weapon that you have no skills and probably no abilities for, or you get to a city and you're able to buy or make more. And some people are trying to excuse this choice, of course, by saying, well, you can craft 50 arrows at a time, it's not that bad. Okay, yeah, I can craft 50 arrows at a time, but I also have to gather the resources. I have to refine those resources, and I have to craft that ammo at a crafting station in a city, which you're charged for. And then on top of that, I have to sacrifice part of my carry weight, something that no other job does. No other weapon has this. And all that means is that ranged players are going to be a minority because they're being needlessly punished in multiple ways. It's silly, and it's why this mechanic went the way of the dodo in MMOs especially. This is again another mechanic you see in shooters or survival games, and it just makes absolutely no sense in a game like this one to put one type of player, or two types of players in this case, at a disadvantage that no one else has. It was a very, very poor choice by the developers. Overall, New World has some of the weakest combat I have seen in an MMO by being reduced to basically 2 button presses. And I'm not sure how well this is going to translate into endgame because I really can't see a lot of interesting boss mechanics being a thing in a game that is basically just point, shoot, and dodge. However, the real game has nothing to do with combat. The real game seems to revolve around crafting and gathering, and you're going to spend a lot of your time looking for and gathering resources and then taking them back to refine them before you finally craft them. It's hard to avoid this aspect of the game since many of your repeatable quests require you to gather or craft something. Even kill quests will often require you to skin your target. Nearly every tree, bush, and rock is also gatherable and will respawn just like enemies. Unfortunately, that also means that if you're trying to gather carrots for a quest, and so are 3 other people around you, and a couple more are just trying to gather carrots so they can cook, you need to be on your toes, otherwise you're going to have a little bit of a wait. Fortunately, when you gather anything from skins to lumber to ore, you're also going to get a lot of each one of those items. Like, it's not unheard of to get well over 20 ore from one rock. I think my maximum I've ever gotten was about 50 or 67. And then on top of gathering every little thing you see, you have to go into every house. You have to go into every set of runes, everything that you see laying around the game, because there's these random chests laying around that have miscellaneous items that you're going to need to craft anything more than just basic crafts. So it's just gathering upon gathering upon gathering. And the downside to this is that the crafting and gathering system is really, really basic. When it comes to gathering, all you really have to do is have the appropriate tool equipped. Then walk up to a rock or tree, whatever, click on it, and then sit there and wait, and wait, and wait, and wait as your character slowly mines that rock or harvests that plant. Crafting just requires a crafting station, and you can do any amount of craft you want with a blink of an eye. You're able to add Azoth or other items to a recipe to change the outcome or to get a higher quality item, but it still doesn't require anything outside of a click and some RNG luck. Crafting stations also have tiers, so even if your skill is maxed out, you may not be able to craft all items in every area, because the crafting stations have not been leveled up by players doing city board quests. Traveling around the overworld has been a hot topic, and it's going to take up a lot of your time because there's no mounts in New World, so you just have to slowly run everywhere. There's not even an option to sprint, and teleporting can only be done from safe zones like cities or those random teleport points you see every now and then as you move around the world. There is an option to return back to the inn that you're registered at, but that option is on a 60-minute cooldown timer, which is about 40 to 50 minutes too long, in my opinion. The arguments for no mounts and restricted travel have been interesting, I guess you could say. I've heard a lot of people saying, if you want mounts or teleports, it's only because you want to rush to endgame and you're a lazy player, or something along the effects. The people who have been against mounts have been incredibly vocal about it. But honestly, not having mounts is a drag. I mean, running for over a kilometer just to kill 3 wolves before running back, frankly just sucks, and it makes questing, one of the already most boring and tedious parts of any game, even more boring and tedious, especially when you only have 3 objectives set on repeat like you do here. What many people have been doing is just intentionally getting themselves killed so they can death warp back to a settlement after they do what needs done, because they also decided not to add a death penalty. And finally, the very last thing I want to cover is the cash shop. Because while it's not uncommon for a game to have a cash shop, Amazon may be doing something a little shady here. Surprise! Now, there's no pay to win elements on the cash shop that I could see. It was mostly just skins, which is not a bad thing. I am totally down with some skins, and these skins also look incredibly nice. But here's the thing. Going over especially the weapons, there's no difference in the appearance of any of the weapons outside of a slight change of color. So that weapon you're given at the beginning of the game is going to look just like the weapons you get at endgame. And if you want a really slick or sweet looking weapon, you need to buy the skin from the cash shop. Now this goes the same with gear. You cannot just reflect the appearance of anything you want in the game. Now I know there's been a few gear pieces so far that I've wished I could glam to my existing gear, but it's just not an option. You need to buy a glam piece or be stuck looking at whatever they want to give you, and that is nothing but ripe for abuse. And the items on the store are not cheap. It costs upwards of $10 to $20 just for one piece or one set. And $10 for a single weapon skin is just way too much. Granted, there's no subscription and they do need to make money somewhere. But the simple fact that they intentionally restricted the glamour system just to get a few extra sales makes me incredibly resistant to pay for anything, especially at the absurd prices they have them set at. That's not cool, Amazon. That's really not cool. But it's honestly what we expect from you. Now there is plenty more to cover, but this is already getting long, so I'm going to end it here. Overall, what do I think about New World when all is said and done? Well, it's a beautiful game. It just doesn't seem to me at this point to have any depth to it. It's like when you get set up on a blind date and you walk into the restaurant, you walk over to your table and the person is just gorgeous and just beautiful, and at first you're just captivated. And then you look them in the eyes or they start talking and it's just blank. They're just blank. There's a lot of odd choices made by the development team in this game, especially around combat and questing. It really feels more closely related to a colonial fantasy version of a co-op shooter than it is to an MMO like World of Warcraft, Elder Scrolls Online, Final Fantasy XIV, Guild Wars 2, basically any other MMO I've played. Now, some people are going to find this good and refreshing, but to me it just feels no different than if they allowed hundreds of people on, a Far Cry server. It's not new. It's not interesting. It's not an invention they came up with. It's a rebranded shooter with some light MMO elements. And I know that's a loaded statement, and many people may not be able to draw the same comparison, but the lack of mounts, the very simple battle system that consists of basically 2 buttons, the majority of lore scattered around in notes and in books, the utter redundancy of the quests and even the quest objectives, they all honestly scream on the surface like a colonial fantasy version of Fallout 76 that's just prettier and has a lot less bugs to me. It also doesn't really feel like the people who made a lot of the choices on how various aspects of the game are handled are actually people who currently or in the past have played MMOs with anything more than a passing interest. Am I going to keep playing New World? For now, I guess. I'm going to tinker around with it and see if I find anything really interesting, but it's one of those situations that I'm going to have to force myself to get past this hump and just hope that there's something more on the other side, because so far, I'm really not having much fun at all. It's just been a shallow pool of redundancy with no apparent prize or goal to reach at the end. I have no idea what endgame is going to be like, but if the slog that is early game is any indication, I'm not going to have my hopes set too high, and that's coming from someone who primarily plays Final Fantasy XIV, and we know how bad of a slog early game there can be. Yet I still feel the beginner experience is much, much better in Eorzea than it is here in, wow, I don't even know what the world's name is. That is how lacking this game is in telling me anything about the lore. I think it's only really been said to me twice and not in any way that's at all memorable. So there you have it. That's my opinion. But what do you think? Are you playing New World? Are you having a good time, or are you having issues getting into it as well? If you have any questions or comments, if you think I missed something incredibly important, feel free to comment below. I'm always up for a good conversation about this stuff. And as per the usual, it's been a hoot. Until next time, have fun.